Juman, welcome. You were here when Professor Horstman was presenting his information. Do you have any thoughts on what he was presenting today at the committee?
Sorry, myself? I'm sorry, I missed the very beginning.
That is me? Okay, I'll take that one and then I'll pass it to you. But I think just in generally, when we've been talking to students and also talking to future graduates of the country, like wanted to highlight that even the Canada Research Coordinating Committee highlights that research consistently shows that a diverse research workforce is critical for driving the excellence and innovation of the country. For instance, if we are looking at the biomedical fields, if we are looking at finding a vaccine for infectious disease, the way it impacts people of color is very different from impacting a different people of color.
You're indifferent to what he was saying, or you think he's out to lunch, or he might have a little bit, he might be right, or you don't want to say?
Just in general, I think the supporting of EDI within the Tri-Council agency and the criteria is very significant if we want to advance the diverse perspective of people. Yeah.
Okay, and Dr. Andre, do you want to touch on that, or you want to leave it, or?
No, I'm happy to touch on that, and sorry for jumping in. I didn't hear the beginning. I want to acknowledge that whenever you start something new, there are challenges. And I do think that one of the challenges is that some people haven't dug into this in a way that allows them to understand what's being asked. And the result of that is buzzwords. There are also people, like in any system, who exploit the fact that there's this new range of things people are supposed to be able to understand, and they don't necessarily always understand it. So when I hear, for example, that EDI training doesn't work, I don't think training ever works, but I think most people like to learn about something new when it's relevant to their context. And how that plays out depends on how good the training is. Some people go to university and don't learn very much. That doesn't mean university doesn't work. It works for some people. It doesn't work for others.
Boy, the HR department would sure be disappointed that training doesn't work, but we won't tell them that. Okay, I got another question here, and answer it, don't answer it, it's your choice. We're talking about the impact of the criteria. So this is a famous one. I'm sure you've read it. It's from the University of Waterloo. It's the NSERC grant for computer science. Okay, we're talking about computer science. Okay, position 1, all areas of artificial intelligence. The call is open only to qualified individuals who identify as women, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, or two-spirit. Okay, what do you think of that?
I would say when we look at research traditionally, the women and diverse people was excluded at the beginning. So if there is
so then it's fair now to exclude everybody else. Is that what you're saying?
That is not what I'm saying. It's just like there are some ways that maybe to have these type of people around the table, we need to start having programs that kind of loop them around. Not saying that we need to exclude people, but like having more of an equity base of having those people loop around, but also just recognizing that when we look at people who are receiving the grants and funding from the government, most of them tend to be likely men compared to women.
Dr. Andre, do you want to comment on that? You don't have to. I'm just curious if you wanted to comment on that position.
I would like to comment, actually.
Okay.
A couple of things. One is, particularly in AI, actually having gender diverse people doing AI is really important. We know that there are biases built into those systems that are likely because the viewpoints of the people who were creating those systems was from a very narrow part of society. So in particular for that area, I can understand that. The other thing is just to reinforce what my colleague has just said. There are data that suggests that people are being filtered out early. There's one particularly good study from the University of British Columbia done by a vice dean there. And what they showed was if you look at the pool of applicants versus who gets on the short list versus who gets invited for an interview and gets hired, from the short list to who gets an interview, racialized people drop out of the bucket. But if they get invited, they get hired. And so what they did was actually...
You're making a good point here, because I can remember from an earlier study that we did, we had a research professor talking about it's the professors that do the hiring, right? Isn't it the professors that do the hiring for these?
100%. So, the
So,
problem
I mean,
is they
are our
don't
universities,
recognize the
I mean, a lot of people, everyday Canadians would think, wow, these people at these universities, they're so enlightened, they're so great. But are they all a bunch of racist white men running these job selections here? Because it sounds to me like these universities, all our guests come here and it sounds like it's all these racist white men running it, and the university doesn't fire them. So what's going on here in our universities? Do we need to defund our universities, or what's going on here?
So you know what I'm going to say to that. But let me just say this. It's not an us and them, actually, believe it or not. One of the reasons I started doing this work, so I for years experienced things as a black woman that I didn't know was because I was a black woman until I married a white man. And they said, what? And then I realized it was related to my identity. But I went to all these sessions that talked about things that happened to racialized people. And it was all about lived experience. And as a scientist, it did not convince me. What convinced me was the literature. The literature that shows experimentally that if you think someone is a black woman, you judge the same stuff really differently. And I have that same problem. I did an implicit association test, which tests whether you associate certain things with certain racialized groups. I have a mild to moderate tendency to associate positive things with whiteness and negative things with blackness. I grew up in suburban Vancouver. The only black kids I knew were my family members. It's the media. It's not evil people twirling the mustache in the bushes. It's not just white men. It's everyone. It's society. And that's why we need to put up acknowledgements that this stuff exists, it happens, and that we can have processes that make sure it doesn't influence our decision making.
Your honest answers.
Thank you.